What is up, Packers fans, and welcome back to another episode of Packer Report TV. I am your host and the publisher of Packer Report, and I got to tell you, I am going to just call this thing what it is, and this is as bonus episodes get. This was very unplanned, very out of nowhere, but like definitely some stuff that I want to dive into. We're going to bring on from Pro Football Focus, Dalton Wasserman. Dalton, how are you, man?
Fantastic. Another great week of football coming towards us. Always good to talk about it.
Absolutely. Obviously, name of the show, Packer Report TV. You know who we're about to talk about. This is not some wide-ranging football discussion, but if you don't mind, just kind of explain who you are, how long you've been with PFF, what you did before, and just kind of your real quick bio, credentials, et cetera. Why should people care what you have to say?
So this is my 5th year with PFF, first year doing full-time content. I was actually a grader for the last few years, so I know the ins and outs of all the PFF grades and how it works behind the scenes and how how it gets translated and said to the people and all that stuff. So I was a grader for a few years, been writing content for almost 2 years now on the college and the NFL side, and now been getting more on the video side. Started with college last year now, so I'm on the NFL, the grade release show with Trevor Sikkema on Mondays, as well as our college football show on Sundays and Tuesdays. So a little bit of everything. I just love all football, Ross, and you talk about knowing the ins and outs of the grading and the grading process. Being that I've done it before for a while, it's really something I'm able to translate for you as far as from behind the scenes to now just getting it out into the world.
Yeah, I want to ask you a real quick kind of broad stroke. So 60 is average, right? You would describe 60.0 as doing what you're supposed to do on that play, no better, no worse, just sort of you accomplished your goal, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. A net neutral, you would say. If you have a handful of guys at 60, that's kind of your floor of like, okay, they can be on the field. It's, are they adding a whole lot? Not necessarily. Are they a big net negative? Not necessarily, depending on the matchup. It's just that's kind of when you talk about the baseline of 60 is where you're looking at is like, okay, do we need to play this guy more or less, or how good of a job is he doing? And sometimes there's variance that comes with that play to play. Some guys are 60s and neutral every play. Some guys are high and low and get there. But that's the most net neutral number that you could pretty much have on our scale.
Gotcha. Any reason, is there any reason it wasn't 50? When you think about that, is 60 more of like, well, okay, that's where like high school and college grades kind of are? I'm just wondering if you have any idea. This might be a dumb question, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm actually not sure. That's probably something that goes way back to the creation of it in like 2006 when we were first created.
Because I'm old enough to remember when PFF grades were pluses and minuses.
Oh, yeah. So, like, back when they went to the standardized version of 0 and 100, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't been around that long, so I don't know how the ins and outs of that initial process went. But, yeah, it is kind of a thing that visually can be a little bit jarring because it's 0 to 100, and we're trying to standardize it. I don't know exactly when 60 became the standard number there. It's kind of, as long as I've been following it, even before I worked here, that's kind of just what I've known of, like where if you're grading a 60, then it's like, okay, maybe it equates more sometimes to the pass or fail thing at the school level when it's 0 to 100. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I think that goes way. There's probably a very old story about how that goes back to, and I haven't quite been around that long.
That's fair. All right, I want to talk to you about one guy. Interception in 4 straight games. Right now, minimum of 200 snaps. Xavier McKinney has your 4th highest grade overall defensive grade. And I think my humble opinion, the most important thing is that he leads the NFL in coverage grade at the safety position, period. He leads the league. I still feel like even when Green Bay signed him, and look, safety is not edge rusher, safety is not wide receiver 1, safety is not quarterback. Like, dude, I get it for sure. I understand it. But even when folks were making like their lists of the top safeties in the league or preseason All-Pro, or just like, I don't think he's ever really been talked about. And you guys have basically graded him out for 3 straight years. No, he is a second team or first team All-Pro safety.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's a great player, and I believe he led all safeties in coverage grade last year too with the Giants.
I think you're correct.
I got to be honest with you. He was my single favorite free agent signing of this offseason. Just the combination of his ability, especially to play in single high, with Jeff Hafley and the new defense that they're running in Green Bay. I thought it was my favorite free agent signing. I thought it was such a good scheme fit. He's such a talented player. And it was at such a position of weakness, too, for the Packers. The biggest concern last year was the middle of their defense, especially at linebacker and at safety. And to fill in the safety spot with a guy like this, and obviously they drafted Javon Bullard and a couple other guys too, but McKinney is so one of those guys at safety, especially in coverage. His range is off the charts. He can play one high or two high. It doesn't really matter. Any scheme, he's really making their secondary go right now. And his ability, like you just mentioned, 4 interceptions to make plays on the ball, that's what you want in a safety, right? You want him turning the ball over and preventing deep shots and having teams afraid to throw at him. So he's had a massive impact. He's had every bit the impact that I thought he would. Again, my favorite free agent signing of the offseason, and that's coming to fruition right now for their defense.
One thing that is not coming through to fruition, and I wanted to go through this because I'm now looking at season-long grades for Green Bay specifically. And I think this matches kind of how people feel. Although I would not necessarily be as low on TJ Slayton, having watched every game as maybe you guys are. But Green Bay didn't play a ton of base, right? So like they weren't in the 3-4 a ton, like the actual 3-4. So there wasn't a ton of two gapping by these defensive tackles. But everybody talked about, oh man, they're going to one gap and go. Like this is a perfect fit, not necessarily for Slayton, but Kenny Clark's just going to get to go. And all these defensive linemen are just going to get to go. Well, 20 players have logged a defensive snap for the Green Bay Packers and ranked number 19 with a 46.3 overall grade, which is bad, and ranked number 20 with a 36.2 overall grade, which is also bad. And on plenty of snaps, 180 for Kenny Clark and TJ Slayton, are your starting defensive tackles, Kenny Clark and TJ Slayton. First, I'm going to ask you what's kind of going wrong. And second, I'm going to kind of ask you to get like into the grading aspect of that and why PFF seems to think that Clark and Slayton are struggling so mightily.
Yeah, so I think on the field that, look, there can be an adjustment. You just mentioned it, from a 3-4 to more of a 4-man front. And I think Kenny Clark and TJ Slayton, they're so used to, bench pressing guys and holding up gaps. I know Slayton would play over the center a lot in past years, and we've seen Kenny Clark with the bull rush cause disruption in the run and pass game. It is an adjustment, I think, to a new system. And I think you talk about there are different types of defensive tackles, defensive linemen, who certain guys are penetrators and certain guys are kind of gap holders and two gap guys. So I think it is an adjustment that they're trying to make on the fly, right? And especially with starters not playing a ton in the preseason, you get more and more of this early in the season where there's an in-season adjustment to a new system. And I think even those guys, you have guys at linebacker too, are just, I think their entire run defense is making an adjustment to just from the way that they used to do things to now what they do under Jeff Hafley. So I think it is something that should get better with more reps, especially Kenny Clark, because we've seen him play at such a high level for such a long time. But it's something they're getting used to, right? And it is a lot different. The principles are different. The techniques are different. What their job is completely different. You mentioned again about penetrating one gap. That's a lot different. That's a lot different job than locking up and trying to read two gaps at a time. So I think that's something that can get better with reps. And as far as the grading goes, look, when you talk about especially run defense grades, does it correlate to maybe how many rushing yards you gave up, let's say against the Colts game, where in the Colts game where, they did a pretty good job in run D, but to sometimes what it comes down to is, are you beating your man on the block, right? And are you winning to the proper direction, or are you filling that gap, or are you overrunning it as someone running through your gap? There's a lot of nuance and detail, I think, more than maybe anything else we do in the run defense grades, as far as guys doing their jobs and filling gaps and being where they need to be. So right now, obviously, they're struggling on the inside to get that done, but those are things, they are fixable, right? And I think they are fixable with more repetition.
While I'm still on the defensive page, I want to ask you a quick question, because this has sort of been a something that never really made a ton of sense, right? And it's often when it's higher than all of the numbers. So just for an example, and this happens occasionally, and so it's not a average, it's not an aggregate. Like, I can't ever really figure it out. But if you look here, just Jair Alexander, he hasn't blitzed, so no pass rush grade. That's fine. His coverage grade is 72.7. I think that's pretty volatile, because I think there's like a good game and then like a super elite game. I think his grading for you guys has been super volatile. 64 tackling grade with 1 missed tackle on the season and a 71.1 run defense grade. With that said, if you remember all those numbers, 71.1, 64.1, 72.7, his overall defensive grade is 73.6, which is higher than all three of those. So that is some things that people that want to know more about PFF and the way you guys do things, that might be something that sticks out to them. And they're like, well, what the hell is that?
Yeah, no, I get it. And look, I think one thing we try to stress enough is that it's not a straight average. So like your aspect grading is not just going to be an average and brings to your overall grade. And we try to, the other thing we try to stress too is your season long grades are not just an average of your overall grade. It's meant to create a number that gauges the overall contribution, right, of those things together. So I can't tell you I know the exact equation because that's some algorithm that people a lot smarter than me make behind the scenes, and they put that in. But it's definitely not a straight average. That's not how that works. It's kind of what it kind of represents is like, okay, he's contributing in run D, he's contributing in coverage, and both of those things kind of put together make what is the overall grade, right? So same thing, if you have a guy who has an 80 run D grade and an 80 coverage grade, and his overall grade's like an 85. Well, look, I got to be real. There's not a whole lot of players that get an 80 in both of those. So it kind of stands to reason that he'd be a little higher in the rankings overall because a player can do both. Whereas I look at someone like Xavier McKinney and I see a coverage grade of 89.5, a run D grade of 62.9, which is pretty mediocre. It's kind of a net neutral. And then his overall is an 89.1. So you're talking about slight differences here, especially with a guy like Alexander. And I think the big thing to remember is, like, say, just all three of those grades being in the low-ish 70s for Alexander, it's more about pinpointing the range that a guy is playing in as opposed to maybe a 1-point difference. Like 1 point across an entire season is like maybe 2 or 3 plays on a difference. It's that range of like, okay, Alexander across the board is grading in the low to mid 70s. That's the type of football he's playing right now. As far as the granular 1-point differences, at times can be kind of negligible.
All right, let's get out of the super deep stuff. And I want to ask you just sort of like a football question. Like if we were having a beer at, a local establishment, let's just talk ball for 1 second. Lane Johnson currently unavailable. Is he out for Philly? He's always nicked up, it seems like. This is the annoying part about playing Philly in week 1 is like, a bunch of their really good guys are going to get hurt, but everybody's ready for week 1. And so you play like that squad, but let's just throw Lane Johnson out. If it's not Lane Johnson, which it probably is Zach Tom the best right tackle in the National Football League?
Ooh, that's a fun question. He's certainly up there, and he's a guy we've liked for a long time, even going back to his days. I believe was it at Wake Forest he was at? Yeah. He was Wake Forest. I mean, such a great player. Right now, outside of him, we have Tom as the highest graded one. Personally, I would lean towards Penei Sewell even above Johnson, and Penei Sewell is just a spectacular football player. I would put Penei Sewell number 1, but Tom is quickly becoming one of those elite guys. He really has been a good player for a long time. I remember even in the offseason there was talks about possibly moving him to center, and there was some quote about somebody thought he could be a Hall of Fame center too. This is just a really good, well-rounded football player. Run game, pass game. He's your best offensive lineman right now. If you needed him at another spot, I'm sure you could put him there. But he's a guy we loved at Wake Forest, went later in the draft that he should have, and the Packers got an absolute gem. I would have Penei Sewell number 1. It's hard not to. He led all offensive linemen in overall grade last season, but Tom's up there, man. If you're talking about right tackles, he's probably one of the best 3 or 4 in the game right now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't sit there and argue with Lions fans. Ever since Detroit got good, all they want to do, their fans, is argue, which I guess is fine. Well, the problem created, and I guess we can chat about this briefly, the problem that's been created is, now, all my misgivings aside, thinking that Green Bay probably should have been more in the cornerback market. You lose a couple guys, all of a sudden you got Corey Ballantyne and Eric Stotts out there getting cooked, but they take Jordan Morgan, round 1, 25th pick, and per your own grading, per my eyes, per everything, Sean Ryan is a sure as shooting starting right guard in the NFL. I'm not saying he's awesome, but he's a top 100 pick. He is exactly what they do, which is take, super athletic tackles that are maybe a little bit undersized, kick them into guard. And I mean, TJ Lang, Josh Sitton is like a borderline Hall of Fame level guy. I mean, that many all pros, but they've done it a billion times, right? I mean, it's what they do. Sean Ryan now appears to be on that path of tackle kicked inside to guard that's going to work out. Well, is Jordan Morgan going to play over Rasheed Walker? Jordan Morgan is not going to play over Zach Tom unless you move Zach Tom. And by your grading and by most Packers fans' opinions, the least skilled, efficient, qualified, whatever offensive lineman that Green Bay has is center Josh Myers, who happens to be on an expiring contract. So that's where I think some of the Zach Tom stuff comes from, is like, okay, if your best five don't include Josh Myers, and I'm fine, I'm cool having that discussion because I think it could be real. Where do you play Jordan Morgan? Do you teach him to play center? He's kind of a smaller tackle college prospect. He's smart. Could he play some center? Well, Zach Tom just is a good center. There's tape of that from Wake Forest. So do you throw Jordan Morgan at right tackle and kick Tom into guard if you think he's a Hall of Famer? The problem that they've created for themselves, and it is a very rich man's problems, is Elton Jenkins is good, and Sean Ryan might also be good. So if there's not a spot at guard, what do you do with Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom, and Jordan Morgan?
Yeah, it's really the interesting question. And you go back to the draft, and a guy that I really thought would have fit in, who has played center before and is playing center pretty good for Tampa Bay right now, is Graham Barton. I honestly thought the Packers were going to take Graham Barton at that spot. And it does create a little bit of confusion. And I think it's hard with Jordan Morgan too. You mentioned at least the Zach Tom theory is plausible, right? Because he played center before, but Jordan Morgan was a left tackle at Arizona, and a very, very good one. And essentially because of arm length, I believe was the reason I was given. That's why he apparently can't play tackle in the NFL. Part of that was one of the big questions in the preseason with the Packers. What is the right combination up front on this front five? And they're not playing bad. I mean, they're by no means are they playing bad, but you're right where you go, okay, at center, there was a center right there in the draft. Okay, and now what do we do with Morgan? And Sean Ryan is playing well. And Morgan, the real problem is, look, so far this problem has solved itself because Jordan Morgan's had injury issues. And he had a little bit of an injury history at Arizona. Now he's got a shoulder problem that just doesn't seem to go away. So, if the long-term answer is at guard, or do we know, I actually haven't looked into this before, do we know if Sean Ryan can play center either?
They've tried him there. It's a theory. I think he's not noted to be like the most cerebral offensive lineman. I think the playbook side and some of the like that mental processing stuff has been what's held him back, not his physical tools. So then to ask somebody like that to manage the offensive line, and plus I think his greatest strength is like his brute strength and his ability to road grade. I'd like to keep my road graders at guard and kind of have sort of a can do everything athlete at center. It's just the way I would build an offensive line. And I think really, Dalton, the biggest question or the biggest concern if you're a Packers fan is it is so hard to acquire elite level tackle play. How can you just take one and throw him at center and say, I sure hope the next guy can play right tackle? Like, that is scary.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And even if you were going to put Jordan Morgan at right tackle, it's something he didn't really do at Arizona. So you're still adjusting to a new position. The Jets are kind of seeing this right now with a guy like Olufashinu, who he never played the right side in college, and it's a hard transition for him right now in the spot that they need him. So it is tough. And what makes it even harder is you mentioned as elite of football as Zach Tom is playing, why would you risk moving him? He's your best offensive lineman. So it's a tough task right now. And again, it's good to have depth when Jordan Morgan is healthy. Maybe he's not starting and you have to find some longer term plan for it or see how the rest of the season goes for Rasheed Walker. Rasheed Walker, pretty good in pass protection, not so great in the run blocking department right now, grading around a 50 in run blocking. So, I think the Jordan Morgan decision, I just wonder if it's something that's more of a long-term one, get some depth in there and maybe next offseason start to figure this out. But between his injuries and their front five at least playing good enough right now, especially with Tom at right tackle, I don't know that you can mess with it a whole lot in season in search of just an answer for this one guy, even though you drafted him in the first round.
The one combination I'd be interested in, and we'll kind of wrap up. This show is a little bit shorter than Andy's. We like to be a little bit more digestible, so we'll try to kind of cut it off at 20 minutes. But Elton Jenkins, sometimes people do forget, was an elite college center. He has been a great guard. That's cool. But if you want Jordan Morgan to be a little bit more comfortable, put him at left guard. Put him at left guard. Move Elton Jenkins to center. Sean Ryan stays at right guard. Zach Tom stays at right tackle. That's one that if you aren't going to re-sign Josh Myers, and I don't think that they will, I would at least check it out now. I think they have their center of the future in Duke's Jacob Monk, but that is another conversation for another day. Dalton, thanks so much, man. This was really cool. Like I said, it was last minute, but I think this turned out awesome, and I think the fans are going to love it.
Oh, yeah, anytime. Let me know. Let me know anytime. I really always appreciate talking football, talking with anybody's team. So it's always fun to break it down and evaluate these guys.
All right. Thank you, sir. Folks, have a great rest of your day, and go Pack Go.